because we have 3 more issues to do in 50 minutes. So we want to actually 60 minutes. So we have divestment, we have conflict mineral technologies, and we have bottled water. So we're kind of going from more up here to getting down to some of these grounded campaigns that have requests for initiatives, right? So the first one is divestment. Maybe the divest, are you here to talk about this? Yeah. What are the tensions here, divestment, that are going on? Anytime you need to take a break, you can take a break, right? And we haven't even thrown that in there. And I guess before we go to this, because we're moving from food to divestment, Meredith left, right?
Yes.
She's out of here, but we want to thank her publicly, because if there's anyone who put this thing together, it was her. So let's give her a hand. Okay, so back to divestment. So what are the tensions of that issue, and we'll air it out.
Okay, my name is Annie Burns, and I'm a junior here, also part of Climate Action 350. And I just want to clarify something about divestment first. So not a lot, but a few people are talking about divestment have sort of been like, I agree that climate change is a serious issue, and it's like we ought to be doing our part, but divestment from fossil fuels specifically is not the way to go about doing it. And it's really important to know, divestment is not exclusive to anything else we've been doing. It's simply another tactic. I mean, this is in addition to carbon taxes, youth legislation, and the reduction of their energy use. So that's sort of the disclaimer. Divestment is a strategy more than anything. It's moral or social. I mean, I think unless every single major institution in the U.S. or the world pulled out their holdings, it wouldn't actually make a legitimate dent in the profits of these companies. What it does actually is force the conversation. It forces really influential institutions like universities, who have always sort of been beacons of progress and discussion, to take a stance on this really important issue. So that's kind of disclaimer. So at the local level here in Madison at the university, divestment does not, one of the biggest issues we have is it's not glamorous. It's kind of complicated to understand. So there's this big knowledge gap. And so it's not an easy issue to communicate concisely about. And there's a lot of momentum about divestment in the industry and on a national organizing level, but a lot of people here don't know about it unless you're watching for it. So that's probably our biggest obstacle, is sort of publicity and engagement and how people can get involved with this. Also, unfortunately, it's perceived, or I guess as such, has become a lot more politicized than it really actually is. I mean, climate change is not a partisan issue, even though that's how it's painted. It's going to affect everybody, and so so what we found is a lot of faculty members in particular are a little bit hesitant to get involved with this, just because, especially in our economic climate, it's touchy. It's so sensitive.
So your question is how for the whole panel, and for us, what would be what's your name?
Our main question, I suppose, is just when you hear about this, what are the main issues that you have with it? Ideas for getting people more involved on a broader scale. Basically, it's something that even if the DoD Foundation is sort of we consider it, it's to actually affect real change on a rather efficient basis. We need a lot of bodies, we need a lot of support behind it. And it's not going to happen if there are just 10 of us meeting with members as we can. So.
How do you take this one to scale? Yeah, Tom.
So let me maybe start with some questions that arose as I was listening to the original presentation. So you're talking about divesting of the top 200 companies in the fossil fuels industry. So here's how I hear that there are probably a couple of those that are unique and their entire business is in the fossil fuels industry, but the vast majority of them will have some very significant investments in the very things that you're trying to encourage: alternative energy, new technologies, etc. I mean, Virent is a company here in town that actually started as a spin-off of the university that's looking at making fuel from crop waste. One of the largest investors in Virent is Shell right now. So what's the sense of the message that we're sending when when the companies that you're asking to be divested in are actually doing things that I think your organization would be really interested in. The other thing that I want to respond to, the other thing I want to respond to is, what was the girl's name that?
Teresa?
So Teresa made the argument that it was a moral choice. And I'd argue that yes, there is somewhat of a moral choice for the foundation to make, but I would challenge you to find anywhere in their authorizing documentation of what they're supposed to do that they're supposed to include morals in their investment choices. So it might be that they actually can't make a moral choice, that their criteria are laid out as far as return on their investment, and those criteria don't include a moral choice. Now, the next thing that she said, which I thought was really powerful, that over the long term, this might be a bad investment. I think that's your winning argument. I mean, the foundation should be investing over a long period of time. I mean, these aren't investments that go in and come out and go in and come out. So if you could make the case that investing in fossil fuel companies are in fact a bad investment over the long term, that becomes very powerful. And then you can couple it with this moral argument, acknowledging that it's an argument that you're making to the community, even though it doesn't resonate with the foundation.
Yeah, and that's something, we're sort of involved with the foundation and the president, Mike Knetter there. And that's something he said, this idea of fiduciary responsibility. I'm sorry, when Teresa was saying that it's like a moral imperative, a moral decision to divest, that's not anything that the foundation is saying. They don't have that in their policy. Their policy is to, support the UW in their mission statement, which does have language about sustainability and, long-term well-being. But anyway, fiduciary responsibility, as we've all sort of, us and Mike Knetter have discussed it, is like maximizing return on investments. And there are increasing numbers of reports that come out that show socially responsible investing. I wish I knew more about investing lingo, so pardon me if I get something wrong here. But basically, you're not going to lose anything, much at all, if anything, on carbon-free investments. And so as far as just like pure return on investments, there's little to no risk presently with divestment, and that's only going to become even more secure as the carbon bubble grows in the long run.
So you were just responding to the
Yes,
economic argument.
yep.
Yeah. Okay.
Just follow up a little bit on this discussion with Tom. I think this is a really interesting, another complex question. All these are really complex. They don't have simple answers. And most oil and gas companies, actually, they are energy companies. They do invest. BP has geothermal, they have solar, they have wind, they have tidal, they have oil and gas as well. So they're not just oil and gas companies, they're not just fossil fuel companies. I always think of, I'm a pragmatist, I guess. And I grew up in a household where everything had an internal combustion engine when I grew up. We had motorcycles, mini bikes, there was like an engine on everything. And as I've gotten older, I've gotten away from all those things. I made personal choices in my life, but I didn't want those things in my life. I didn't need a boat, I don't need a motorcycle. I have wood in the house that I can run in and enjoy. And I think that's a really powerful statement to make to a company in a capitalist society, to vote with what you buy. And I'm always trying to think of how I change that conversation to put the pressure points where they really feel it. And that's in demand. Change the demand and the energy mix will change and what people produce. For some reason, our nation, I don't think it's happening right away. We all wanted everything renewable, and we wouldn't buy any oil and gas products. Those companies would change from oil and gas companies to all renewables.
So divestment to
Choice.
right? Just being
I always think of it just flipping it around. Same idea, just from a different.
I think this is a really complex problem, like Craig was saying also, and I don't think there's any one answer that anyone could give you on this. But we are an research institution, and we're here to teach and learn. And I just wonder if there's other ways that your campaign could also look at what other choices, I think Craig was saying, can you make that, as a consumer, that steer you and your choices away from fossil fuels if that's your campaign. It's, because if you look at how much energy the world needs and how we get our energy, it's extremely small percent is from renewables. So, you know, if everybody was to get on the campaign and divest from these companies, it's still not possible for them to stop producing fossil fuels. But can we look at other ways we can use fossil fuels more efficiently by production and use and consumption? And Luke mentioned himself about transmission. Transmission and the loss of energy along our transmission lines is a huge problem because that energy goes away and we never can get it back. So part of this problem is educating ourselves and others about what choices can we make that's different, and what economic impacts can we make that might steer in a better, more sustainable energy choice. You know, we all have clothing that's made from fossil fuels because that operates the manufacturing facilities where our clothes are made, and it operates the plants that make our buses and our cars and our bicycles and so on and so forth, heats our homes. So what can we do as consumers to divest ourselves from needing so much of that stuff? And what can those companies that use or produce oil and gas, what can they do to make better, more efficient sources of energy or uses of that energy that they mine?
So I fear that in playing devil's advocate, I don't want to sort of really push so. As a symbolic gesture, I really think what you're proposing is good. I think how you pitch it is what I'm trying to help you think through. Listening to Angela, what about instead of divesting of fossil fuel companies, we invest in alternative energy companies? I mean, it's always so much easier to spin it as a positive than a negative. And to go to the foundation and say, we'd like you to commit 1% or 0.5% or some number that you'd come up with to investing in companies that are dedicated to developing the next generation of fuels and in that whole supply chain. Because it's very positive. We're going out there and we're saying, we're looking at the future. This is the future. We should be investing in the future. It isn't as powerful for political purposes as the symbolism of divesting in fossil fuel companies. And I understand from a national perspective, there's that emphasis. But just from, we're a practical Midwest state and saying, we really want to be sending a positive signal into the market as an alternative.
A couple more and we're going to shift. Yeah.
So, Greg talked about, demand, and then I'm also thinking about, the economics of, not doing fossil fuel. When I go back, I'm in planning, design, and construction. What I'm thinking more is more of a push to using less, using only what we need, and that will drive demand. And so, for instance, when we build buildings, why do we build far more buildings than we need? And I was, looking at graphs and realized that a 3-family house, probably 50 years ago was about 1,000 square feet. The same house is 2,500 square feet for less people. So I think more of the campaign that we need to right size, to what we need, and then it will drive demand down. And it's also about choices. And at some point down the road, as we continue to encourage the use of renewables at the research, there will come a tipping point, I think. But to say today divest if for some reason we stop using fossil fuel, as an example, on our campus, for instance, much of what we use to heat and cool, even though we move from coal to gas, it's still fossil fuel.
Anything else to end on?
Yeah, just kind of to respond. So I sort of, yeah, we can all vote as consumers, and we should, and that is, definitely something to do in the meantime, but I think this is more of a systematic change, or that's what it's an attempt to do, because BP, for example, did for a while ago, they had a bunch of solar initiatives, but the thing is, like, currently renewables just are not as lucrative as fossil fuels, and so there's less incentive for these big companies to be developing renewables on the scale that we need that to happen. And so, as such, all their profits translate to enormous political power, and so there's all this money and time spent lobbying Congress to keep oil and gas as cheap as possible. So I think the vast majority of Americans would be more than happy to buy hydropower, solar power, wind power, but it's just not, the infrastructure is not there, it's not convenient, and it's not affordable, and that is on purpose. That's because of these big fossil fuel companies, and so divestment is sort of a way to almost disable the political clout of these companies, so we can start putting more resources into renewable energy, essentially. So that's kind of why, yes, we need to be doing, buying or voting as consumers in the meantime, but there's also huge need for reform and systematic change. So
Very quickly.
I just want to reiterate that when you look at how many lobbyists are in Washington are in Congress, there's about something like over 8 per congressman that are just constantly lobbying to keep what she said, fossil fuels as cheap as possible, and they're prohibiting the construction of high-speed public rail, which would essentially, cut down huge amounts of fossil fuels that would be used. And because it is so convenient for people, the demand just won't be enough for us to make this kind of necessary change that is essential for us. And this is why I think divestment is so important, just because it has to be something drastic, and we can't just kind of keel over and accept our fate. We need to fight back against these special interests that are fighting with all the money they have, which is, huge amounts of it.
Okay, with that, we're going to shift again. I know, it's so painful.
A little more, come on, Terry.
I know, but then we don't get to